Hello, hello. Today we're going to be talking about the brain. Specifically, we're going to talk about how our brain receives our senses. Okay, so before we get into it, let's talk about which are our five senses. We have our sense of smell, like when mom makes our favorite meal and we could smell it all the way from our room. We have sense of taste when we taste it and it just tastes so yummy. A sense of touch, like when we grab our toys and we touch our toys, or when our parents hold our hands. Sense of sight, like when we're watching our favorite cartoon while we're sitting down on a couch. And we have sense of hearing, when we are listening to our cartoon being played, but we're not watching it, but we can hear it. But what is the brain? The brain helps us think, feel, and remember things. So when you eat your favorite cookie, or you hear your favorite cartoons, or when you see your toys, or you smell like delicious pizza or something, your brain is that thing inside your head that helps you understand all of those things that are going on around you. Your brain is basically what helps you feel the world around you. But the brain can't do it all by itself. It's too much for the brain to handle. So our brain has a little helper that directs traffic. So imagine these tiny traffic officers in your brain, and they're directing traffic. And all your senses, everything you feel, touch, smell, hear, see, everything is going through one specific, the specific traffic officers. They are sending them to specific areas in your brain. So, some parts of the brain responsible for senses are. So, those tiny traffic officers, they send the vision part to the back part or the back side of our brain. Hearing is sent to the sides of our brain. And touch is sent to the top side of the brain. So all these senses, they can't just go to one specific area in the brain. There's different areas in the brain that they must go to, and then they are where they are processed. Let's get a little bit more technical. So those tiny traffic officers we were talking about that direct our senses to different parts of the brain, that's called the thalamus. So the thalamus acts as a relay station that sends our senses to the region of the brain responsible for processing each sense. Our brain is an organized structure in the sense that each area of the brain has a different role and responsibility. Different parts of the brain are involved in different functions. Our whole brain can't do everything. Like it has to be organized, otherwise we wouldn't be able to function that way. Areas in the brain are connected with one another and they work simultaneously. They work together simultaneously. What that means is just because you heard something, that doesn't mean that it's only one region of the brain that's being activated. They all work together so that it can make sense of it. The thalamus has different areas that are specialized in processing different types of senses, which we'll get into that later. So now the question is, well, do all senses pass through the thalamus? The answer is no. There's one sense that does not pass through the thalamus, and that is the sense of smell. And it's the only sense that does not go through that one, the filter called the thalamus. Our sense of smell travels directly to the brain and reaches the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is responsible for hearing, process our feelings of happiness, sadness, anger, etc., and additionally is where we store memories. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but because it goes directly into our temporal lobe, which is also where we process the smelling. There's a lot to do there with emotions and memories, which again, we'll get into it later. So about let's talk now about sense of smell and memories. Have you ever smelled something and the smell mentally transported you back to a certain memory? Like, for example, the smell of your grandma's cookies, and all of a sudden you're, you're five again and you're running to grandma's house and, ready to try her cookies. Or, for instance, the perfume of the girl that you like, and you smell it and it instantly takes you back to the day you met her and you smelled that for the first time. Well, usually there's an emotion that comes with that memory and the smell. This is because our temporal lobe, where we process smell, is the same region of the brain where we store our memories in something called the hippocampus. Additionally, our amygdala, which helps us process emotion, is also located in the temporal lobe. So, as we said before, we talked about emotion and we talked about memories, where our memories are held, well, both of them are held in the temporal lobe, also where we process smell. Where we store our memories is called the hippocampus, and where we process our emotions, that's called the amygdala. All right, so let's take a deeper look into the thalamus and its role. The thalamus is connected to a structure called the brainstem, which connects our brain to our spinal cord. So our brain isn't just a floating thing in our head. No, it connects all the way to the rest of our body through the brainstem, which is connected to the spinal cord, which is connected all the way to our back. The brainstem is composed by three parts: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Inside the brainstem is the reticular activating system, also known as RAS. Okay, so there are some additional functions of the thalamus. It doesn't just act as a relay station for our senses. It also has additional responsibilities and roles. So another one is it acts as a motor control center. It helps coordinate movement, and it's important for smooth and controlled movement. It also helps with the regulation of consciousness and attention. So it keeps us alert, and it helps us stay focused, as well as it's a cognitive and an emotional processor. So it's connected to something called the limbic system for emotional processing, memory storage, and cognitive functions. So let's talk a little bit about the limbic system. The limbic system is essentially a group of different brain structures that they work together to process your emotion, memory, and motivation. And it's also known as the brain's emotional center. So when you hear of limbic system, think of emotional center. Let's talk about some of the major components of the thalamus and the different, relay systems that it has. So one of them is called the lateral geniculate nucleus. That's the relay center that processes visual information. So what happens is it receives signals from the retina in your eye, and it organizes it before sending it to the primary visual cortex, which is located in the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is the back part of our brain, and that's what processes visual stuff, things that we see, our sight. And then we have the medial geniculate nucleus. That's the relay center that processes auditory information. So with that, noise travels through, or it travels up the brainstem. So obviously first we receive it in our ears, and then the noise travels up the brainstem, because remember, the thalamus is connected to the brainstem, which is connected to our spinal cord. It goes up, so again, it goes up the brainstem and the inferior colliculus, which is located in the midbrain part of the brainstem. And it integrates the sound before sending it to the thalamus. The MGN then processes the sound information and sends the information to the primary auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe is, again, on the sides of our brain. And again, that is where the limbic system is located. Remember, limbic system, emotional processor. So, some major components of the thalamus. Again, it's the lateral geniculate nucleus. It is where the vision goes through, so it's visual, travels to the occipital lobe. The medial geniculate nucleus, hearing, it goes to the temporal lobe. Ventral posterior nucleus, touch, which goes to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is the part in the top of our brain. So why is sense of smell the only sense that doesn't pass through the thalamus? The answer? Evolution. Yep, that's right. We do not receive our sense of smell, or the thalamus does not receive the sense of smell because of evolution. Let's go into that a little bit. So our sense of smell is arguably the most ancient sense, and it's linked to survival. Unlike sound, touch, sight, and taste, olfactory signals bypass the thalamus and go straight from the olfactory bulb to the olfactory cortex in the temporal lobe. This suggests that smell evolved from before the thalamus became the central sensory relay system in our brain. Even single-celled organisms like bacteria have something called chemical sensing. So chemical sensing is basically the ability of a cell to detect specific molecules or chemicals in its environment, whether it's in the air or the water. And it's crucial for its survival. If it detects a toxic substance, it'll move away from it. If it detects something that it can eat, it'll get close to it. Our modern sense of smell evolved from ancient chemical sensing systems, which allowed even the simplest organisms to detect molecules in their environment. All right, so just to summarize what we've learned today. We talked about the thalamus, and we talked about how it's an essential part of our brain, and it acts as a relay station that sends all of our senses to the brain, to the corresponding area of our brain. And the only sense it doesn't process is smell. Additionally, we also talked about how the thalamus has other roles as well. It acts as a motor control center. It also helps regulate consciousness and attention, as well as acting as a cognitive and emotional processor. We talked about how the thalamus is connected to the brainstem, which is connected to the spinal cord. We also talked about how the brainstem has 3 different parts to it, the pons, midbrain, and medulla oblongata. And here are some of the major components of the thalamus that include the lateral geniculate nucleus, which processes visual information. It processes our sight, and that goes to the occipital lobe in our brain. Remember, the occipital lobe is the back part of our brain. And then there's also the medial geniculate nucleus, which is a mouthful, and it processes auditory information. The auditory information is sent to the temporal lobe of our brain, which is the sides. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something today. Lateral geniculate nucleus, medial geniculate nucleus. Jesus. The geniculate.
Lateral geniculate nucleus.